Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel we have back once again Dr. Brian Keating. He's a professor of cosmology at UC San Diego, the host of the Into the Impossible podcast, and a fellow YouTuber. He's been a guest on many channels including Lex Friedman, Jordan Peterson, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, just to name a few. We've broken our conversation into several parts, so go check out the other videos down below. So let's get to it. What about energy scarcity and climate change? Obviously, this is a very contentious issue, and some people, are really far on the spectrum. It's going to be the end of the world as we know it, near-term extinction. You have other people who think it's not a problem at all. We're just coming out of an ice age. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to adapt. And there's other people in the middle. No, clearly the greenhouse effect is a known scientific phenomena. There's obvious negative consequences to the rapidity of change as opposed to just, these longer changes. And, human civilization will have to adapt. Where do you fall on that spectrum being a physicist?
Yeah, so let me just point out again that you've managed to sneak in another double-edged sword, right? Another ambiguous hyper superposition of different positions that could be reasonable on both ends of the spectrum, lulling and luring the human mind into thinking it's a simple question, therefore my side is right, therefore you're my enemy if you don't agree with me, and we can be polarized. So just like abortion, just like gun rights, climate change. So there are sober individuals on both sides of the debate. Then there are extremist, alarmist on both sides of the debate, for and against, by the way. So it's very difficult to split that golden mean when you have the potential, this feeling there's a sword of Damocles holding over your head. There's some basic physical truths. The way that carbon dioxide absorbs visible light and reflects infrared light and acts as sort of a blanket. That's been known since, Arrhenius back in the late 1800s, if not earlier. On the other hand, we know that there are other things that cause much more global warming, like methane and so forth, that are produced primarily by livestock. And then you get people that want to, get rid of livestock. The problem, again, will come not from the knowledge, the scientia, the science. It will come from the sapienza, the sapience, the wisdom. So we have to rely on those of us who traffic in wisdom and applying knowledge, not just having knowledge, but applying knowledge. As they say, knowledge is knowing a fruit. A tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So what does it mean for us as a species to be wise? Well, we've kind of denigrated philosophy and we kind of outsourced that to pundits and the Twitterverse and politicians. But it's inarguable. The science is inarguable that this can happen, but there's other science too. And I don't mean like alternative science. I just mean there's only so much carbon on this planet. Okay, carbon's not like, there's not an infinite amount of carbon and that will just keep producing it. And in fact, here at UC San Diego are some of the world's foremost experts and Nobel laureates as part of the IPCC. And they've done calculations that suggest that we will actually hit peak carbon. We use up all the carbon, and now we're on the backside of the power curve, so to speak, in a few decades, less than 100 years. And these climate models that forecast the future, it's very difficult. We have to distinguish between two things that sound similar but are actually very different: complexity and complicated. Okay, if I want to put together, kind of the solar power machines, the Intex that I bought from you or whatever, that's very complicated, right? I mean, it's actually, it would take me, even with a PhD in experimental astrophysics, it would take me a long time to build it, but I know I could do it. Just like I know that somebody who's bright enough could follow and do exactly what I did for my PhD thesis, 20 plus years ago. In other words, it's complicated, but there's a series of instructions. It's not complex. Complexity means that the system, in order to model the system, the best model for the system is the system itself. So in other words, the best computer to model our climate and our spinning Earth and rotating around the sun, this glowing ball of nuclear fusion, is that system itself. It's a complex system. It follows patterns. It can emerge from chaotic behavior. It can exhibit effects like the butterfly effect. And so therefore, it's very difficult to try to use reasoning, which applies to complex things, that you use to apply to complicated things. In other words, if I try to assemble a solar, power generator, it's very complicated. But if I follow the exact same steps that you did to make it, I'll get the same result. Not so with complexity. There's high sensitivity to the initial conditions, to boundary conditions, and things that we can't really forecast. Those are usually glossed over. And so I tend to think, kind of again, try to split the golden mean. Try to say, look, it is a risk reward scenario. The penalty for inaction could be quite bad. On the other hand, taking off my lab coat and putting on my three-piece suit as a politician, I would say that there's a precious little that's in our control right now in the Western portion of the globe. And that's because, we have countries coming online and industrializing. And guess what? They don't want to skip to solar panels. And guess what? They really don't have that many Tesla charging stations, in sub-Saharan Africa right now, or in Bangladesh. They have brilliant people. They have incredible human capital, but they don't have the physical infrastructure. Maybe they'll bypass it like they did with cell phones. They didn't have like wired, internet connections. But the point being, we can't force upon them that factor. Another factor, we have a very green power source. We actually have two very green power sources. One is the glowing ball of hot gas above us, but the other one is the glowing atom that actually, is the only, city scale gigawatt level generator that we know and we can employ instantaneously, control, store, shut off. And it's been demonized by some of the same people who claim that we're in a climate emergency. So that makes me really fail to take those people seriously. And as we're investing in nuclear fusion, which is promising, but look, we've got this fusion reactor that's free, that orbits around us every day, it never takes a sick day, never goes on a May Day holiday celebration. This is the sun, but we have fusion reactors too. We have 6 of them about 10 miles from where I am now at UC San Diego, in San Diego Harbor, in the form of, of Nimitz class aircraft carriers that are nuclear powered. So to say that they're not safe and that we shouldn't put them anywhere near people is just preposterous. And it shows that maybe they're not as serious about taking the climate change that they predict as serious as they claim to be.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest grievances with the whole push to make these changes, is that if it was the case that the people in the most prestigious elitist positions were making these sacrifices, it would be a lot easier for people to get behind and say, okay, I can see you're making the sacrifices, you're scaling down your lifestyle, therefore, maybe I should follow in suit. Just to add to one of the things you said with respect to the minimal amount of carbon that humans released, I think the argument for that is that it's additive. So to the background, it's like compounding as opposed to, the amount of methane that is typically released, which apparently is increasing. And, all these things are kind of coalescing, making the problem worse, because the more permafrost melts, the more methane is released. So there's that whole positive feedback loop thing. But I think that's the argument that they would say, is that, well, it's a small amount, but it's like the tipping of the scales type thing, that it doesn't take much to tip the scales, and then all of a sudden it's, like if you have
because we can't replicate that. We can't do a randomized controlled trial to see if that's actually true. And of course, again, I'm going to play the age card on you because I do think I'm older than you, but we're not going to get out our driver's licenses to confirm it. But back in the 70s, they were worried about, and even as late as 1989, the same Jim Hansen, NASA, they were talking about, little ice ages, potential for ice age, to reemerge. They were talking about global cooling. And I'm not saying, oh, look how stupid, they don't know what you're talking about. No, as a scientist, you change your mind when new evidence comes into the contrary. The only point I was making about, and you're absolutely correct about the compounding ratchet-like behavior, but even if you ignited all the carbon on Earth, there is a maximum. Even if it's methane, it doesn't matter what it is. And so you'd have to say there is a bound on how much that could happen. Would we turn into Venus, or would it be something different? And it is very hard to know on the scale without having, as one of my past guests on my podcast, Nobel Prize winner as well, Tim Palmer is at Oxford. He's called for the analog of the Large Hadron Collider, or CERN level investment in, which is quote unquote only a few $1 billion, in a climate, global climate change supercomputing center, perhaps using quantum computing, AI, et cetera, all the buzzwords, but to really make, this Manhattan Project level effort towards understanding the model But that's very different than saying you have to stop using, your ICE and your Toyota Tundra. You have to stop using it right now. That's not going to make some farmer in Bangladesh stop doing whatever he or she is doing. So I think these are very complex problems, but it pays to pay some attention to the physical limitations. It doesn't mean you should listen to physicists. I mean, some of the dumbest people on a practical level are my fellow physicists and me half the time. So, be careful not to conflate wisdom with intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the ice age thing, a climatologist might argue that wasn't the prevailing view at the time with respect to the 1970s. But I get what you're saying in terms of just the overreaction and the hyper politicization of how we're going about these problems to the point where it's totally irrational. I mean, obviously, if we were serious, the side effects of a potential nuclear disaster, which we can for the most part control right now, as far as I know, are much less than continuing down this road to ruin. Now, with respect to the carbon, as far as I know, yes, there's like a diminishing return in terms of the greenhouse effect. So the more carbon there is, doesn't necessarily translate into a one-to-one heating. But I guess the concern there would be that there was, it set off these other loops, like maybe the Arctic sea ice melts and that doesn't have the albedo effect where it reflects the sun's light, and maybe the more methane. But like you're saying, this is limited, but I think we're pretty much in agreement that it has the potential to be a problem, and it's not something we should just brush off. Is there an alarmist factor there? Maybe it's hard to measure, like you're saying. Climate is a very complex thing, and it's complicated at the same time. So it's very hard for us to test this fully in a lab. So maybe, not to spend too much more time on that, I think we both agree that it has the potential to be a problem. And I don't even think there's a substantial amount being done right now, aside a few extra carbon taxes. I mean, we're burning the same amount of energy. Other countries are industrializing. Like you said, it's kind of an untenable situation because what do you do, right? Like, you're not going to stop.
Right. I mean, the West has, as far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the data show that, the West, America in particular, and Canada, North America, has reduced, global greenhouse gas emissions substantially. I mean, it's more than just the error bars would suggest. But the other, hemisphere, and there's a whole other hemisphere they call the global South, et cetera, that hasn't done as much. But I did want to double click on something that you said just a minute ago. Is it gets hyper politicized. I think that's an sort of a synonym perhaps for religiosity. And as I've done studies of my colleagues and even the National Academy of Sciences here in America. Their membership is 90% do not actively affirm a belief in God. And so, but I always like to think that pretty much everybody has a religion. Even atheism is a religion of a sort. But certainly things like environmentalism can be a religion. You see the passion, the Greta Thunbergs and stuff. That's not altogether rational to claim that, the Earth has X number of years. Look, Nate, the Earth is going to be just fine. I mean, it's going to continue spinning around old Sol for at least, another couple of billion years until the sun becomes a red giant and engulfs it potentially. But even that, we don't know for sure. That'll be a bad weather day. But the point is, we're a tiny little membrane on top of this vast surface area that we call Earth. And there are some people who, worship Earth Day and worship Mother Earth and so forth. And, good for them. But the point is, you have to be aware. And you talk about these very frequently, the different biases, confirmation bias. You already mentioned normalcy bias. You've talked in the past about authority bias. Human beings have this propensity, this bias towards tribalism. That's how we survived for 125,000 years. But so it makes sense to then check your biases. And it doesn't pay to live an unexamined life. And even I have to do that. And that's why it's helpful to talk to people that I don't agree with. Look, you can tell I'm a fairly conservative person, although, I've had on many Democrats, from Noam Chomsky, to Larry Tribe. I've had on some of the most liberal people in the world, and I love talking to them. On the other hand, I've had on Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Jordan Peterson. So, I've had on both sides. That's how you learn. If you just talk to people you agree with, you'll remain intellectual, but probably pretty stupid. I call those people, Lenin used to talk about we need useful idiots, but I see a lot more of useless, geniuses. People are so brilliant, but they really never stop to think, well, what the hell are we actually doing? And how can I actually improve? The only thing that matters is how we treat each other and what we do to benefit, the flourishing of humanity. Some people find that through religion. Other people find that through science. Other people find that through the environment. But we should, be cognizant of what is driving our potential intrinsic biases. There will be people that know how to use AI, and there will be people that don't know how to use AI. And there'll be AI that knows how to use itself, and there'll be AI that doesn't know how to use itself. It's the key cheat code to the beneficial survivability of our species.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.